This is Elena Voss. 28 years old. Former waitress. Current wife of the most powerful mafia boss in the city. Soon to be, something else entirely. 3 years ago, she was nobody. A woman serving tables in the financial district, saving pennies, dreaming small dreams. Then Dante Moretti walked into her restaurant, and like a fool, she mistook obsession for love. Intensity for devotion. A golden cage for a home. Tonight, that cage door is finally opening. But Elena isn't running away. She's walking towards something they never saw coming. Across from Elena sat Dante Moretti, a man whose whisper could end lives, whose empire ruled the city's shadows like a dark god commanding his underworld. Beside him, his mother, Serafina, smiled with the satisfaction of a serpent finally cornering its prey after a long, patient hunt. The divorce papers bled black ink across the mahogany table. Legal words that all translated to the same brutal truth: erasure. "I'll sign," Elena said quietly, her voice steady as stone. Serafina's laugh came quick and sharp, like a whip crack in the storm. "Well, that's the first intelligent thing you've done in 3 years." She leaned forward, her designer perfume mixing with the scent of rain and expensive whiskey. "I told Dante from the beginning you weren't suited for this family. Too soft. Too ordinary." She paused, letting the word hang in the air like a noose. "A waitress." She said it like it was a disease. Like serving tables for honest money was somehow more shameful than ruling through fear and blood. As if serving tables qualified you to sit at ours. Elena had been 25 when she met Dante. Working double shifts at an upscale restaurant in the financial district, serving $100 steaks to people who never looked at her face. Saving every penny for a life that felt impossibly far away, maybe night school, maybe her own small place, maybe just the security of knowing she could pay next month's rent without holding her breath. Then one night, Dante had walked in. He'd commanded the room without saying a word, his presence like gravity itself, pulling everything toward him. When he'd asked for her number, she'd thought it was a joke. Men like Dante Moretti didn't notice women like her. Men like him had models on speed dial, socialites competing for their attention, women who'd been groomed for this life since birth. But he had noticed. And God help her, she'd been foolish enough to believe it meant something. He'd courted her with the kind of intensity that felt like being caught in a riptide, beautiful and terrifying and impossible to escape. Flowers that cost more than her monthly rent, delivered daily. Dinners at restaurants she'd only read about in magazines, where the waiters knew his name and the chef came out personally to greet him. Weekend trips to Paris on private jets, just because he wanted to see her face when she saw the Eiffel Tower for the first time. He'd made her feel like the center of the universe. Like nothing mattered except her happiness. Like love could actually exist in the shadow of his dangerous world. She'd been so incredibly, devastatingly stupid. "The restaurant where I worked," Elena said, her eyes still fixed on the papers, had a saying. "Everyone comes in hungry for something. Your job is to figure out what they really want to eat." She looked up then, meeting Dante's cold gaze. "I thought I understood what you wanted, Dante." "What I wanted," Dante said, leaning back in his chair with the casual arrogance of a king on his throne, "was a wife. Someone to stand beside me at events, look beautiful in photographs, and provide heirs to continue the Moretti name." He took a slow sip of his whiskey, and his next words hit like bullets. "You failed at 2 out of 3. The words should have shattered her. They would have, 3 years ago. Now they just bounced off the armor she'd been building, piece by painful piece. Every night he'd come home late smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. Every time he'd taken a call in another room, his voice dropping to intimate whispers. Every time he'd looked at her like she was furniture he'd grown tired of. "No children in 3 years, Serafina's voice dripped with venom and accusation. "Do you know what the family has endured? The whispers, the speculation. People wondering if the great Dante Moretti has been cursed. If his bloodline will die with him. She leaned closer, and Elena could see the cruel satisfaction in her eyes. All because you couldn't perform the one duty that mattered. Elena had spent 2 years in fertility clinics. 2 years of needles and tests and procedures that left her feeling like a broken machine being examined for defects. 2 years of doctor's appointments where she and Dante sat in sterile waiting rooms, not holding hands, not speaking, just existing in the same space like strangers waiting for a bus. The doctors had found nothing wrong with her. Nothing wrong with Dante. Just one of those inexplicable failures that sometimes happened. But in Serafina's world, there was no such thing as chance or fate or simple bad luck. There was only blame. And it always landed on the woman. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you what you wanted," Elena said. And to her surprise, she found she meant it. Not because she owed them anything. Not because their disappointment mattered. But because there had been a time when she genuinely wanted a child with Dante. When she'd imagined a little girl with his dark hair and her smile. A little boy with his strength and her kindness. When she'd thought love might be enough to build a family on, how pathetically naive she'd been. Sorry doesn't change anything. Dante stood, buttoning his suit jacket, custom-made Italian wool, probably worth more than most people's cars. "Sign the papers, Elena. It's time for both of us to move on." The words were out before Elena could stop them. "To the model?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Dante's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his perfectly shaved jaw. "Careful." "Why?" Something was crackling open inside Elena's chest. Something that had been building for months, pressing against her ribs, demanding release. "What are you going to do? Divorce me?" She felt herself smile, not with humor, but with the kind of dark amusement that comes from hitting bottom and discovering you've landed on solid ground. "You're already doing that. You've been doing it for a year, piece by piece. Every time you came home late. Every time you took a call in another room. Every time you looked at me like I was furniture you'd grown tired of. This," she gestured at the papers, "is just the paperwork." "Don't be dramatic," Serafina snapped, her composure cracking slightly. "You knew what this marriage was. You knew what this family required. If you couldn't meet those requirements, then this is the natural conclusion." Natural. Elena tasted the word like poison. "There's nothing natural about this. This is murder, Serafina. You're just doing it slowly, with lawyers and prenups instead of bullets. If you're expecting sympathy. I'm not expecting anything." Elena pulled the papers toward her, scanning the lines of legal text that all added up to the same thing: erasure. "I stopped expecting anything from this family 6 months ago. Right around the time Dante stopped wearing his wedding ring." She watched him instinctively touch his bare ring finger, then catch himself. Caught. Dante walked to the bar cart, poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey that probably cost more than Elena's first car. "Then we understand each other. You'll sign, leave quietly, and we'll all move forward." He didn't even look at her as he spoke. "My lawyers will ensure you're escorted from the property with your personal belongings. Nothing that belongs to the family leaves this house." Serafina stood, smoothing her dress with hands that wore rings worth more than Elena's entire childhood. "Your clothes were purchased with Moretti money. The jewelry, the handbags, the shoes, all of it stays. You can take what you brought into this marriage, which I believe amounts to 2 suitcases of clothes that are 3 years out of date." Elena had known this was coming. She'd read the prenup carefully 3 years ago, and again 6 months ago when she'd first felt the foundation cracking beneath her feet. But hearing it stated so plainly, so casually, still felt like being slapped. 3 years of her life, reduced to 2 suitcases. "The car is registered in my name," Dante continued, his tone businesslike, as if he were discussing a corporate acquisition, "as is your phone, your laptop, and the credit cards you've been using. All of it will be deactivated tonight. He took a slow sip of whiskey, finally meeting her eyes over the rim of the crystal glass. I'm not a cruel man, Elena. I'll have my driver take you wherever you want to go. A hotel. A friend's apartment. A homeless shelter, if it comes to that. His voice dropped, almost gentle. But after tonight, you're on your own. Thunder cracked so loud the windows rattled, and the lights flickered. For a moment, Elena could see their reflections in the rain-streaked glass, Dante and Serafina standing together like monarchs in their castle, and her, alone, about to be cast out into the storm. It would have made a perfect painting. The exile of the unworthy wife. Elena looked down at the papers, at the signature line that waited for her name. Once she signed, Elena Moretti would cease to exist. She would go back to being Elena Voss, the waitress from nowhere, the woman who'd had a fairy tale for 3 years before reality came calling. I need a pen, she said quietly. Serafina's smile was triumphant. It's right there, dear. The one I gave you on your wedding day. How fitting that you use it to end what should never have begun. Elena picked up the pen, felt its weight in her hand. Mont Blanc. 18-karat gold. A wedding gift from a woman who'd hated her from the moment Dante brought her home. Who'd spent 3 years making sure Elena knew she didn't belong, would never belong, could never be worthy of the Moretti name. Before I sign, Elena said, her voice cutting through the storm's noise, I want to say something. Dante sighed, the sound of a man whose patience had been exhausted. Elena. Just one thing. Then I'll sign, and you'll never have to hear my voice again. She looked up, met his eyes directly for the first time all evening. When you proposed, you told me a story about your father. Do you remember? Dante's expression flickered, the first genuine emotion she'd seen from him all night. I don't see how that's relevant. You said he taught you that power comes from knowing what people want. Not what they say they want, but what they really want. The hunger underneath. Elena kept her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. You said that's how he built this empire. By understanding desire. Serafina moved closer, her presence like a cold front. What's your point? My point is that Dante learned the lesson, but he didn't learn it completely. Elena turned the pen in her fingers, watching the light catch the gold. He learned to see what people want. He never learned to see what people are. Philosophical nonsense, Serafina scoffed. Sign the papers, girl. But Elena wasn't looking at Serafina anymore. She was looking at Dante, and something in her gaze made him set down his glass. You saw a waitress, Elena said softly. Someone hungry for a better life. For security. For love. You saw someone you could give things to, someone who would be grateful, who would be shaped by your generosity into exactly what you needed. She paused, and her next words fell like stones into still water. And you were right. I was hungry. I did want those things. But you never asked why I was working in that restaurant. You never asked where I came from. You never asked who I was before you decided who I should be. It doesn't matter who you were. Dante's voice had an edge now, sharp as broken glass. It only matters who you failed to become. You're right. Elena placed the pen on the signature line. It doesn't matter who I was. But it will matter who I am after this. She signed her name in one smooth, practiced motion. Not Elena Moretti. Elena Voss. The name she was born with. The name she should never have given up. Serafina exhaled, the sound of victory, of a battle won. Finally. Some sense. Elena stood, setting the pen down carefully beside the signed papers. I'll need a few hours to pack. You have 1 hour, Dante said, already turning back to his desk, already dismissing her from his world like she'd never existed in it at all. Marco will drive you. He'll wait in the car while you pack, then take you wherever you want to go. He picked up his phone, thumb already scrolling through messages. I suggest you think carefully about where that is. Elena nodded, started toward the door, her footsteps silent on the expensive Persian rug. Oh, and Elena? Serafina's voice stopped her at the threshold, sweet as poisoned honey. If you're thinking about going to the press with some tragic story about the heartless Moretus, I'd reconsider. We have lawyers who specialize in making problems disappear. She paused, letting the threat sink in. And you signed an NDA along with those divorce papers. One word to the wrong person, and you'll spend the rest of your life paying off legal fees. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. Are we clear? Crystal, Elena said without turning around. She walked out of Dante's study, down the marble hallway lined with art that cost more than most people would see in a lifetime. Past the Caravaggio that Dante had bought at auction for $8 million. Past the Monet water lilies that Serafina claimed were an investment. Past the grand staircase where Elena had descended on her wedding day in a dress that weighed almost as much as she did, feeling like a princess in a fairy tale. She'd been such a fool. The house was silent except for the storm. The staff had been dismissed for the evening because Serafina insisted family business should be private. No witnesses to the execution. Elena climbed the stairs to the bedroom she'd shared with Dante, though shared had become a generous word in recent months. He'd been sleeping in his study most nights, claiming work kept him up late. She'd stopped pretending to believe him around the time she'd found a woman's earring in his car. Not hers. Never hers. The bedroom was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Bed perfectly made by the housekeeper, hospital corners crisp enough to cut. Her perfume bottles arranged just so on the vanity, Chanel, Dior, Tom Ford, all gifts she'd never asked for. The book she'd been reading on the nightstand, bookmarks still marking her place in a story she'd never finish. It looked like a room from a magazine spread. How the Other Half Lives. It had never felt like home. Elena pulled 2 suitcases from the closet, the same ones she'd brought 3 years ago, battered leather that had belonged to her mother. She'd kept them in the back, hidden behind the Louis Vuitton and Hermès luggage that Dante's stylist had insisted she needed. Now she pulled them out and began the strange arithmetic of deciding what parts of your life you could carry. The clothes Dante had bought her stayed in the closet. Valentino dresses she'd never chosen. Prada suits for charity galas she'd hated attending. Louboutin heels that had given her blisters and matching scars. The jewelry went back in the safe. Diamond earrings. Sapphire necklaces. A wedding ring that had cost more than her childhood home. The shoes, the handbags, the designer sunglasses, all of it remained. She took only what she'd brought, jeans worn soft with age, sweaters that had belonged to her mother and still smelled faintly of her perfume if Elena concentrated hard enough. A leather jacket she'd saved for 6 months to buy when she was 22, working 3 jobs to make ends meet. Things that remembered who she was before Dante Moretti decided to reinvent her. The rain lashed against the windows as she packed, and Elena found herself moving faster, as if the storm was counting down to something. She grabbed her mother's pearl necklace, the only piece of jewelry that was truly hers, given to her on her mother's deathbed with shaking hands and whispered words, "Never forget who you are, Elena. Never let anyone make you smaller." She'd failed that promise so completely it hurt. Elena took the photo album from before her marriage. Pictures of a girl with bright eyes and bigger dreams, surrounded by people who'd loved her for who she was, not who she could become. A few books, poetry mostly, the kind Serafina had called pedestrian and common. Then she stopped in front of the closet one more time, pushed aside the expensive clothes that had never felt like hers, and found what she was looking for in the very back, hidden behind shoeboxes full of heels she'd never worn. A small wooden box. No bigger than a shoebox. Locked with a combination only she knew. Elena hadn't opened it in 3 years. Her hands trembled slightly as she spun the numbers, July 13, 19. The lock clicked open with a sound that felt like possibility. Inside, wrapped in silk the color of midnight, lay three things. A phone she'd never used. A passport that didn't say Moretti. And a business card so old the edges had started to yellow. On the card, elegant script that spoke of old money and older power, Ashcroft Holdings. London. Paris. New York. And at the bottom, a phone number she'd memorized but never called. Elena pulled out the phone, her fingers remembering its weight. She pressed the power button. Dead battery, of course. 3 years of silence would drain anything. She found the charger at the bottom of the box, still wrapped in its original packaging, and plugged the phone in. The screen slowly flickered to life, glowing in the dark bedroom like a promise. Downstairs, she heard Dante's voice, then Serafina's laughter. They were probably celebrating already. Planning his next move. His next marriage. His next attempt to secure the heir his mother demanded. Maybe the model was already on her way over. Maybe she'd even helped him plan this. The phone buzzed as messages began downloading. One after another, years of accumulated words flooding the screen. 3 years of messages. All from the same number. All saying variations of the same thing. When you're ready, we're here. The door is always open. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. Elena scrolled through them, her vision blurring. Years of messages she'd been too proud to read. Too convinced that she could make her marriage work. Too determined to prove she didn't need the family she'd walked away from when she'd chosen Dante. The family she'd abandoned because he'd said, "It's me or them. Choose." And like a fool, she'd chosen him. Her finger hovered over the number. One call. That's all it would take. But pride was a funny thing. It kept you warm right up until the moment it froze you to death. Elena looked around the bedroom one last time. At the silk sheets that cost more than a month's rent. At the crystal chandelier that probably required its own insurance policy. At the view of the city spread out below like a kingdom that had never quite felt like hers to claim. Then she picked up the phone and dialed. It rang once. Elena. The voice on the other end was exactly as she remembered it. Warm like aged whiskey. Strong like iron. With an accent that spoke of old money and older power, the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself because everyone already knew. It's been a long time, my dear. Elena closed her eyes, feeling something crack in her chest. Hello, grandfather, she said, and felt tears break free that she'd been holding back for months. I'm ready to come home. There was a pause. The sound of a man who'd been waiting for this moment for 3 years, trying to control his emotion. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully steady. Are you safe? For now. But I need to leave tonight. Where are you? Still at the Moretti mansion. They've given me an hour to pack and leave. Her grandfather's laugh was soft and dangerous, like silk wrapped around a blade. An hour. How generous of them. Another pause. Tell me, did they offer you a settlement? Nothing. The prenup covered that. I see. And did they explain what happens now? Where you'll go? How you'll live? They assume I'll struggle. Elena's voice hardened. Serafina suggested a homeless shelter. The silence on the other end was the kind that preceded thunderstorms and natural disasters and the fall of kingdoms. When her grandfather spoke again, his voice was perfectly controlled, which somehow made it more terrifying. I want you to listen to me very carefully, Elena. Take only what's yours. Don't give them the satisfaction of thinking you need anything that bears their name. And then I want you to go outside to the front gate. Why? Because in exactly 45 minutes, a car will arrive for you. Not the Moretti driver. My driver. And he will take you to the airport, where a plane is waiting. Grandfather, you don't have to. I have waited 3 years for this phone call. His voice cracked slightly, showing the emotion beneath. 3 years watching my only granddaughter make herself smaller for a man who didn't deserve her shadow. I will not wait another minute. His voice softened, becoming the voice she remembered from childhood, from before her mother died and everything changed. It's time to come home, Elena. Time to remember who you are. Elena closed her eyes, felt tears she'd been holding back for months, years, finally break free. I don't know if I remember anymore. Then we'll remind you. There was steel beneath the warmth now. We'll show you everything you walked away from. Everything you tried to pretend didn't exist because you thought love required sacrifice. He paused, and when he spoke again, there was a smile in his voice. A dangerous smile. And then, my dear girl, we're going to show the Morettis exactly what happens when they mistake kindness for weakness. I don't want revenge. I know. The smile deepened. That's why you'll be so good at it. There was a long pause, filled with the sound of rain and distant thunder and 3 years of silence finally breaking. 45 minutes, Elena. Front gate. Can you do that? Elena looked at the 2 suitcases, at the wooden box, at the phone that still had messages downloading, 3 years of her family refusing to forget her, even when she tried to forget them. Yes. Good girl. Pride filled his voice, warm and genuine. And Elena? When you walk out of that house tonight, don't look back. Never give them the satisfaction of thinking you'll miss what they took from you. Walk out like a queen leaving a kingdom that no longer deserves her presence. I'm not a queen, grandfather. Not yet, he agreed. But you were born to be one. It's time the world remembered that. He hung up. Elena stood in the silence, feeling something shift inside her chest. Not healing, that would take time, maybe years. But straightening. Strengthening. Like a spine that had been bent too long, finally remembering how to stand straight. She finished packing quickly, efficiently, taking only what mattered. Then she changed out of the designer dress she'd worn for the divorce meeting, Valentino, probably worth $5,000, and into jeans and her mother's leather jacket. Armor that remembered who she'd been before Dante had tried to remake her into his perfect wife. 45 minutes later, Elena stood at the front door with her 2 suitcases and the wooden box tucked under her arm. Marco was waiting by the black Mercedes, an umbrella in hand, looking confused when Elena shook her head. I won't need the car, Marco. Thank you. But Mr. Moretti said. Tell Mr. Moretti that plans have changed. Elena paused, thinking. Tell him thank you for the 3 years. And tell him I hope he finds what he's looking for. Though they both knew he never would. Men like Dante didn't know how to find what they were looking for because they'd never learned to recognize it when it was standing right in front of them. Marco looked even more confused, but he nodded and went back inside to deliver the message. Elena walked down the long driveway in the rain, pulling her suitcases behind her. The wheels caught on the expensive paving stones, making small clicking sounds that marked her departure like a countdown. She didn't look back. Behind her, she heard the front door open. Heard Dante's voice calling her name, sharp with confusion and something that might have been concern if she'd cared enough to analyze it. She kept walking. At the gate, she stopped and turned, looking back at the mansion for the last time. It glowed in the darkness like a jewel box, all lit windows and elegant architecture and the kind of wealth that most people only saw in movies. It had never been beautiful to her. Just expensive. There was a difference. Headlights appeared at the end of the street. A black car, sleek and powerful, nothing like the ostentatious vehicles the Morettis preferred. It pulled up smoothly, and the back door opened. Inside, warm light. Soft leather. And the faint scent of her grandfather's cologne, cedar and tobacco and old books. Miss Ashcroft, the driver said, and the name hit her like electricity. Not Voss. Not Moretti. Ashcroft. The name she'd been born to carry. The name she'd hidden for 3 years. Elena looked back at the mansion one more time. Saw Dante standing in the doorway now, backlit by the chandelier, watching her leave. Even from this distance, she could see the confusion on his face. He still didn't understand what was happening. He would. Soon. Elena smiled, not with bitterness or anger, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who just remembered they knew how to fly. Then she got in the car, and the door closed behind her with the soft, expensive sound of a chapter ending. The plane was waiting at a private airfield on the outskirts of the city, not the commercial terminal where normal people flew, but the kind of place where billionaires and diplomats departed without ever dealing with security lines or customs delays. The kind of place Elena had forgotten existed. The Gulfstream G650 sat gleaming on the tarmac, its Ashcroft Holdings logo subtle but unmistakable on the tail. Elena had flown on this plane as a child, back when her grandfather used to take her to Paris for Christmas shopping and London for theater weekends and New York just because it was Tuesday. Before her mother died. Before Elena had run away from her inheritance, thinking she could build a normal life. Thinking normal was better than complicated. Thinking love with a mafia boss was somehow simpler than her family's empire. The flight attendant greeted her by name, not Mrs. Moretti, but Miss Elena, and led her to a seat that was more like a leather armchair than airplane seating. Champagne appeared without asking, along with warm towels and the kind of service that came from years of anticipation rather than transaction. "We'll be landing in approximately 3 hours," the attendant said softly. "Your grandfather wanted me to tell you that dinner will be waiting, and your rooms have been prepared exactly as you remember them." Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She looked out the window as the plane began to taxi, watching the city lights spread out below like a constellation of possibilities she was leaving behind. Somewhere in that sea of light was Dante, probably already on the phone with his lawyers, already moving on to his next acquisition. Somewhere was Serafina, celebrating her victory over the unsuitable daughter-in-law. They thought they'd won. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The estate appeared as the sun rose, 1,500 acres of perfectly manicured grounds in the English countryside, 2 hours outside London. Ashcroft Manor had been in the family for 9 generations, growing with each one, accumulating history and power and influence like ivy climbing ancient walls. The car pulled up to the main house, not a mansion, but something grander, something that made the Moretti estate look like a starter home. Georgian architecture, honey-colored stone glowing in the dawn light, windows reflecting the sky like mirrors. And there, standing on the steps as if he'd been waiting all night, which, Elena realized, he probably had, was her grandfather. Alexander Ashcroft. 83 years old, silver-haired, straight-backed, wearing a suit that had probably been hand-tailored in Savile Row before Elena was born. He looked exactly as she remembered him, except for the emotion on his face as he watched her emerge from the car. For a man who'd built a billion-dollar empire on the principle that emotion was weakness, he looked dangerously close to tears. Elena. Her name came out rough, like he'd forgotten how to say it and was relearning. My darling girl. She'd meant to be strong. Meant to walk up those steps with dignity and composure and all the armor she'd built over 3 years of marriage to a man who'd never really seen her. Instead, she ran. Ran up the steps and into her grandfather's arms like she was 8 years old again, before her mother's car accident, before the grief, before she'd convinced herself that running away from this life would somehow make her free. He held her while she cried 3 years of tears into his expensive suit jacket. Held her while the sun rose over the ground she'd played on as a child. Held her until the storm inside her chest finally began to calm. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry Hush. His hand smoothed her hair, the gesture so familiar it hurt. You're home now. That's all that matters. I should never have left. I should never have. You were in love. He pulled back, looked at her with eyes the same green as hers, the same green as her mother's. Love makes fools of us all, darling. The question isn't whether we fall. It's whether we remember how to stand back up. He smiled then, and it was the smile she remembered from childhood, the one that said everything would be all right because Alexander Ashcroft would make it so. Come inside. You must be exhausted. We'll have breakfast, and then you'll sleep. The world can wait. The house smelled like home, old wood and fresh flowers and the lavender polish the staff had been using for decades. Elena's rooms were exactly as she'd left them, as if time had stopped the day she'd walked out. Her books on the shelves. Her riding trophies in the cabinet. Even the photograph on the nightstand, her and her mother, laughing at something long forgotten, both of them alive and whole and happy. Before. I kept it all, her grandfather said from the doorway. I knew you'd come back eventually. Some birds are meant to fly free for a while, but they always remember where their nest is. Elena sat on the edge of her childhood bed, overwhelmed by the weight of what she'd lost and found and lost again. They're going to be so angry, she said quietly. The Morettas. When they find out who I really am. Let them be angry. Her grandfather came to sit beside her, taking her hand in his. Anger from small people is just noise, darling. It can't touch you unless you let it. Dante will. Dante Moretti, her grandfather said, his voice taking on an edge like sharpened steel, is a child playing at power. He inherited his father's empire and convinced himself that makes him strong. But real power, the kind that lasts, isn't inherited. It's earned. Built. Forged in fire and time and the kind of patience that men like him will never understand. He squeezed her hand. He thought he was getting a waitress with no family, no connections, no power. A woman he could shape and mold and discard when she no longer served his purposes. The smile that crossed his face was terrifying in its quiet satisfaction. Wait until he discovers he divorced the sole heir to Ashcroft Holdings. That the woman he thought powerless controls more wealth than his entire family has accumulated in 4 generations. That the unsuitable wife could buy and sell his empire before lunch without affecting her portfolio. I don't want revenge, Elena said again, meaning it. I know, darling. That's why what happens next won't be revenge. Her grandfather stood, walked to the window overlooking the grounds. It will simply be the natural consequence of underestimating the wrong woman. He turned back to her. Rest today. Tomorrow, we begin your education. You walked away from your inheritance 3 years ago, but it's waited for you. The companies, the properties, the investments, all of it has been growing, accumulating, preparing for your return. I don't know if I'm ready. You are. His confidence was absolute. You were raised for this, trained for this, even if you tried to pretend you weren't. Your mother and I made sure of it. All those etiquette lessons you hated? Those were negotiations training. The charity galas you found boring? Networking practice. The horse riding, the languages, the art history, every piece of your education was designed to prepare you for exactly this moment. He came back to the bed, tilted her chin up until she met his eyes. You think Dante Moretti is powerful? He's a gangster with expensive suits and a talent for violence. But you, Elena? You are an Ashcroft. We didn't build our empire with bullets and fear. We built it with influence and intelligence and the kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself because everyone already knows. Something shifted inside Elena then. Something that had been sleeping for 3 years, buried under the weight of trying to be someone else's version of perfect. She remembered. The charity gala was being held at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, the kind of event where invitations were more valuable than most people's cars, where the guest list read like a who's who of global power. Dante Moretti was there, of course. He'd flown in from Italy with his new fiancée. The model had lasted exactly 6 weeks before he'd upgraded to an actress with better connections. He stood near the bar, surrounded by men who laughed at his jokes and women who angled for his attention. He looked happy. Relaxed. Like a man who'd shed an unwanted burden. He had no idea what was about to hit him. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, "it's my honor to introduce tonight's keynote speaker and the event's primary benefactor. Please welcome the chair of Ashcroft Holdings, Miss Elena Ashcroft." The room turned. Elena stepped onto the stage in a gown that made the Valentino dresses she'd worn as Mrs. Moretti look like practice runs, midnight blue silk that moved like water, custom-made by a designer who only dressed royalty and people who might as well be. Her mother's pearls at her throat. Her grandmother's diamonds in her ears. And on her finger, the Ashcroft signet ring that marked her as the heir to one of the world's most powerful dynasties. She looked nothing like the quiet waitress who'd served tables in a financial district restaurant. She looked nothing like the submissive wife who'd signed divorce papers in the rain. She looked like what she was, power in human form. And as her eyes swept the room, they landed on Dante Moretti. Watched the color drain from his face. Watched his glass slip from his fingers and shatter on the marble floor. Watched him realize exactly what he'd thrown away. "Good evening," Elena said into the microphone, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. "Thank you all for being here tonight. We're gathered to discuss the future of sustainable development in emerging markets, a topic close to my heart and critical to Ashcroft Holdings' mission of responsible global investment." She smiled, the same quiet smile she'd worn the night she'd signed her divorce papers. "Let's begin." Later, after the speech, after the standing ovation, after 100 people had congratulated her and told her how brilliant she was, how powerful, how they'd love to discuss partnership opportunities. Later, Dante found her on the balcony overlooking the museum's sculpture garden. "Elena." His voice was hoarse. "I didn't know. I didn't. I know." She didn't turn around. That was the problem, wasn't it? You never asked. You never wondered. You never thought the woman serving you food might have a story beyond what you could see. "If I'd known." "What? You would have treated me differently?" Now she did turn, and the look in her eyes made him take a step back. "You would have respected me because of my name instead of who I was?" "That's not better, Dante. That's worse." He opened his mouth. Closed it. For maybe the first time in his life, Dante Moretti had nothing to say. "I loved you," Elena said quietly. "For a while, I really did. I thought love would be enough. I thought I could build a life on it, even in the shadow of your world." She shook her head. "But you taught me something valuable. You taught me that love without respect is just pretty chains. That being chosen isn't the same as being valued. That sometimes the kindest thing someone can do is let you go so you can remember who you were before they tried to reshape you." "Elena, please. Goodbye, Dante." She walked past him, paused at the doorway. "Oh, and congratulations on your engagement. I hope she makes you happy. I hope she gives you everything you're looking for." She smiled one last time. "Though I suspect you still don't know what that is." Elena stood in her office on the 42nd floor of Ashcroft Tower in London, looking out at the city spread below like a kingdom she was learning to rule. The Moretti Empire had collapsed 3 months ago, not because Elena had destroyed it, but because without the stability she'd provided, without her quiet competence managing the social connections that held their world together, it had simply fractured. Dante's business partners had pulled out. His political connections had evaporated. His mother's influence had proven hollow without Elena there to make it look legitimate. They'd lost everything. Elena had gained it all. But that wasn't why she smiled as she looked out at the city. She smiled because she was happy. Really, genuinely happy for the first time in years. She'd spent 6 months rebuilding herself, remembering herself, becoming herself. She'd taken control of companies that spanned 6 continents. She'd negotiated deals that would have made her grandfather proud, and did make him proud, he told her so daily. She'd proven that the quiet girl who'd served tables wasn't weak. She'd just been waiting for the right stage. Her phone buzzed. A text from her grandfather, "Dinner tonight? I want to hear about the Singapore acquisition." Elena smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." Outside her office, the city glowed in the twilight. Somewhere in that sprawl of light and life, there was probably a girl working as a waitress, saving pennies, dreaming of a better life. Somewhere, there was probably a woman making herself smaller for a man who'd never appreciate her. Somewhere, there was probably someone who'd forgotten who they were born to be. Elena hoped they'd remember. She hoped they'd find their way home. She hoped they'd learn what she'd learned, that power isn't about what others give you. It's about what you refuse to lose. So what did Elena's story teach us? 3 truths that might just change your life. First, never shrink yourself to fit someone else's vision of who you should be. The right people will love you for who you are, not who you pretend to be for them. Second, walking away from the wrong situation isn't giving up, it's leveling up. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is close a door that was never meant for you. Third, your value doesn't come from what others see in you. It comes from what you know about yourself. Elena didn't become powerful when she returned to her family's empire. She'd always been powerful. She just had to remember. And here's the final truth: the people who underestimate you aren't obstacles. They're opportunities, opportunities to prove to yourself what you're capable of when you stop asking for permission to be extraordinary. So ask yourself, what would you do if you stopped being afraid? Who would you become if you remembered who you were before the world told you who to be? The answer might surprise you. Call to action, warm, personal tone. If Elena's story touched your heart, if you felt something shift inside you while listening, I need you to do 3 things. First, hit that subscribe button. This channel is dedicated to stories that remind us of our power, our worth, our ability to rise even when the world tries to keep us down. Second, drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever made yourself smaller for someone else? What would you do differently now? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Third, share this video with someone who needs to remember their power. We all have an Elena in our lives, someone who's forgotten how extraordinary they are. Be the reminder they need. Remember, you're not here to be someone's supporting character. You're here to write your own story. And it's never too late to start the next chapter. I'll see you in the next story, where we'll explore another truth about love, power, and the courage it takes to choose yourself. Until then, remember, you are enough. You have always been enough. And anyone who can't see that? Well, that's their blindness, not your inadequacy. Stay powerful. Stay true. And never forget who you are. Title: The Mafia Wife. The underestimated emotional story of power, betrayal and ultimate revenge. Description: When Elena signed those divorce papers in the rain, the Moretti family thought they'd won. The quiet waitress they'd dismissed, the unsuitable wife they'd discarded, she'd finally be erased from their world. But what they didn't know was that Elena had a secret. A secret that would turn their entire world upside down. This is a story about underestimation, about finding your power in the darkest moments, and about what happens when kindness is mistaken for weakness. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or undervalued, this story is for you. Hashtags: Hashtag emotional story, hashtag mafia romance, hashtag powerful women, hashtag revenge story, hashtag heart touching, hashtag story time, hashtag motivation, hashtag women empowerment, hashtag never give up, hashtag self-worth.